Hello everybody. I'm going to read you a story that I liked when I was very young, when I got this book of fairy tales by the Brothers Grimm. Now, it's quite a scary story, so I've decided to read it with my friendly favourite puppy dog sitting on my knee. I think maybe you should have your favourite toy as well, Teddy. Here we are, Hansel and Gretel. Once upon a time, there lived a woodcutter and his wife. They had 2 children, a boy called Hansel and a girl whose name was Gretel. The woodcutter and his family lived in a cottage on the edge of the forest. The man worked hard, but he could never cut down enough trees or chop up enough wood to earn more than a bare living. Then a famine hit the land and things got worse. One night, the whole family went to bed hungry, and the bad-tempered wife spoke angrily to her husband. "There is enough food for you and me," she said. "If we eat it, the children will go hungry. If we give it to them, we shall starve." "We must let the children have it," declared the kind woodman. "It doesn't matter about us." But his wife did not agree with him. "They will suffer less if we take them into the forest and leave them there," she decided. The woodcutter pleaded with her, but she wouldn't listen. And at last he had to promise to carry out her wicked plan. Now the cottage walls were thin, and Hansel and Gretel had been able to hear all that their parents had said. "Don't worry," said the little boy to his weeping sister. "I will make sure that we can find our way home again." He opened the door and crept outside. He filled his pockets with the pebbles, which were glittering like silver on the ground in the moonlight. The next day, the children's mother wakened them. "Get up!" she cried. "We're all going to the woods to fetch wood." On the way, Hansel kept stopping and looking round. "Why do you look back, Hansel?" asked his father. "I am watching my white kitten sitting on the roof." But each time he stopped, Hansel threw down one of the white pebbles. The woodcutter built a fire to keep the children warm, and then he left them. They fell asleep, and when they awoke, it was quite dark. Poor Gretel began to cry. "Don't worry," said Hansel. He took his sister to the path, and the pebbles were gleaming so brightly in the moonlight that they led the children home. Here is Hansel. And he's busy putting white pebbles down. And here's Hansel and Gretel when they're just wakening up and discovering that it's quite dark. He took his sister to the path, and the pebbles were gleaming so brightly in the moonlight that they led the children home. Their father was delighted to see them, but their mother scolded them. pretending that the children had lost themselves. When things grew no better, the wicked mother decided to try the plan again. And this time, Hansel could not get out to gather any pebbles. On the way, he stopped as he had done before, telling his father that he was watching the pigeon. But he was throwing down crumbs from the tiny pieces of bread they had been given. Once more, Hansel and Gretel were left behind. When night came, they looked for the breadcrumbs, but the birds had eaten them. The children tried to find their way, but every path looked the same, and soon they were lost. A shining white bird sang such a sweet song that the two children followed it down a path they had not tried before. At the end of the windy path, the two hungry children came across a wonderful sight. They saw a dear little cottage, which was different from any other home they'd ever seen in the world. It's a lovely cottage. I think it might be. Do you see? They just see it and they think, oh wow, they've been following that pigeon all the way into the wood. Oh, it's on the next page. The cottage had walls of gingerbread and the roof was of cakes, while all the windows were of crystal clear sugar. Hansel and Gretel began to eat pieces of the house when the door opened and the owner peered out. The person they saw was an ugly old woman who looked like a witch. She spoke kindly to Hansel and Gretel and beckoned them inside. She gave them a wonderful meal, and when they had finished, she showed them the two little beds made up with warm blankets and soft pillows. She was so kind that Hansel and Gretel could not believe that she would do them any harm. And so they climbed into the beds and fell asleep at once. The old woman took the smile from her face and looked very horrible indeed as she rubbed her hands together. "They will make a dainty dish," she whispered. "I will eat the boy first and then his sister." Poor Hansel and Gretel had fallen into the witch's trap. They were to make her a very special meal. Early the next morning, the old woman seized the sleeping Hansel. In a bony hand, she thrust him into a big cage before she wakened Gretel. "Get up, lazy bones." There she is. "Get up, lazy bones." That's what she said to Gretel. "Cook breakfast for your brother," she shouted. "You must feed him up until he is plump and tender enough for me to eat." Poor Gretel had to do what she was told. She cooked so much food for her brother that he soon grew plump. Now the old witch could not see well, and so she could not discover how fat Hansel was getting. "Put out your finger, boy," she cried. "I can tell from that whether you are growing and getting ready for my dinner." clever Hansel poked a bone through the bars of his cage. The old woman grasped it and frowned, because what she thought was his finger was far too thin. The rest of him must be thin as well. That wouldn't make a very good meal. Every day, there she is, he's holding a little bone. Because she's so blind, she thinks that's his finger. So he keeps getting more and more food. And Gretel keeps having to cook it. Every day, the witch went to the cage and felt the bone Hansel pushed out. Then she would leave him muttering. Poor little Gretel cooked all the lovely meals the witch insisted Hansel should eat. All the witch would let her have were the scraps, and the old bag saw to it that Gretel did not have too many of those. So as Hansel grew very plump indeed, Gretel became very thin. The days went by and the weeks, until a whole month had passed. Hansel sat in his cage, longing to get out and run about, but eating up all the good things poor Gretel had cooked for him. What's going to happen next? Oh. There's Gretel doing all the cooking and cleaning and all the housework. She's getting thinner and thinner. Can you see her? Good. The little girl worked hard in the cottage, and she was the best servant the old woman had ever had. The old woman asked her to clean the cottage until it was spick and span, mopping the floors and polishing the furniture. She made gingerbread and cake to repair the walls and roof of the magic cottage. All the time she tried to think of a plan to help Hansel out of the cage so that they could both escape. The old witch could not see well, but her ears were very sharp. She didn't miss one word the brother and sister said to one another, and so it seemed as if they would never be able to escape. At last the old woman grew tired of waiting for Hansel to grow plump enough. "He will never get fat," she cried. "I will not wait any longer for my tasty meal. Whether he is fat or thin, I shall eat him tomorrow." Poor Gretel cried as she cleaned up the cottage. Then she went for the water that the old woman wanted fetching, ready for the next day's big feast. When morning came, the witch made Gretel stoke up the fire so that the oven was hot enough to cook poor Hansel. "First we will bake," said the old woman. "The oven must be very hot for that. Pile on more sticks, girl, while I make the dough and knead it." Gretel stoked up the fire until the flames shot out hungrily, while the old dame kneaded the dough into a big round loaf. "You must tell me if the oven is hot enough." The wicked old woman had decided to push Gretel into the oven and eat her before she started cooking Hansel. Gretel went to the oven. "How can I tell if the oven is hot enough?" she asked. "Creep inside," cackled the old witch. "Then you will know." Gretel pretended not to understand. "I don't know how to do it," she said. "Please show me the way." "Oh, you are a silly girl," cried the old witch. "The oven is quite big enough for you to climb in and see for yourself." Gretel pretended to try. "The oven is too small. I can't get in," she declared. "The opening is quite big enough," snarled the witch. See, I could get in myself if I wanted to. She went to the oven and poked her head in, which was just what Gretel was hoping for. The little girl gave the old woman a push. And into the oven she went, which was the end of her. Gretel's very brave, and that's a really good push. Then Gretel made a meal, which this time she was able to enjoy with her brother. Now we must decide what to do, said Hansel. We must go home, of course, said Gretel. But Hansel remembered what had happened to them before. I remember too. I'm not sure if I would be keen to go home. Let's stay in the cottage and look round first, he said. Perhaps the old witch had some treasure hidden away. I wonder. The brother and sister went into each room in the house. In every corner they found bags of gold and precious stones, which the old woman had stolen from the unfortunate people who had crossed her path. Hansel packed his pockets with pearls, diamonds and rubies, while Gretel filled her apron. Then they picked up the bags of golden money and set off to find their way home once more. Died, and their father was sitting alone. He was mourning his unkindness to his children, as he had done every day since they had gone. Hansel and Gretel threw themselves into their father's arms, and he hugged and kissed them. I shall never send you away again, he said. Some way we will manage, however poor we are. Then Hansel, with his father looking on in amazement, spilled her apronful onto the table. After that, they gave their father the bags of gold, and there is no doubt at all that they all lived happily together forever after. Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. It's one of my favourites. Did you enjoy it? Bye bye.